Hey friends, you're watching BrainStormAcres. I'm Henry.
And I'm Irene.
We're still in Christmas mode.
Yeah.
Irene's wearing her lovely sweatshirt.
Yes. And Henry has a matching one. You may have seen. I think you wore the other.
I did.
The other day. Yeah.
Right.
Anyway.
We ordered something 3 weeks ago, and it came in a lot faster than we expected. There's something else that I want to talk about, and that is we've had quite a number of comments on canning nuts, vacuum canning nuts. Hello, Rufus. Vacuum canning nuts. People are concerned about botulism.
If I stick a bag, say I buy a container at Safeway or someplace like that, resealable plastic thing, right? And it's just going to sit there on the shelf until you use it up.
And it's sealed, so normally they have an oxygen barrier. They don't have an oxygen scavenger, but they just have an oxygen barrier that keeps oxygen from getting into the bag.
The reason we started canning nuts is, and we're not canning them, we're just vacuum sealing them. We vacuum seal the nuts because it removes the oxygen, the air, not just all the things that are in the air, because air is not just made out of oxygen. We can't live in a pure oxygen environment. But simply removing most of the air by creating a vacuum reduces the rate at which the oils in the nuts are going to spoil. That's why we do it. We also do the same thing with any dried beans or anything else that we buy, because there's nothing like anybody who's ever had flour or dried beans or anything else in storage for a long time. You go to use it, you discover that there's bugs living in there.
Not good.
Not cool, you know? And at that point you're going, ew, I don't really want to eat that. You can eat it. It's not going to hurt you. People have been eating dried beans with bugs in them for centuries, many thousands of years, I'm sure. You try not to have to do that sort of stuff. And sometimes they can make quite a mess where you really do get quite a bit of chewed up beans and stuff there, and it's kind of nasty, and you feel like you need to sort them out at least before you use them. I suppose the advantage is if you can't see your stuff, if you need glasses or something, you just won't even notice that, and I'm sure that's exactly the way it was, centuries ago when people didn't have glasses available. We're just trying to reduce the spoilage. That's all it is. They will not have the life expectancy of a freeze-dried item. They will not have the life expectancy of a frozen item. But, even if it's perfectly frozen. But it reduces the spoilage. I mean, when we have had, now everything is labeled when it comes in and to the pantry with the date that it is given as an expiration date. If I vacuum seal nuts, I mark them with the date when they were vacuum sealed, and they are used in the order in which they came into the pantry. Unless for some reason we were to discover that stuff was way off, but that's not, we're usually very careful to make sure we're not getting a bad batch. Now, we have gotten nuts in the past from an unnamed box store that I stopped buying nuts there because it was obvious that even though the date was pretty new on it, they've been sitting around or they weren't stored right.
Yeah. What we're really doing is we're relying on the original processor's processing of those nuts to make sure there's not too much moisture in the nut. If you're going to harvest nuts at home, that's really an issue for you to deal with. But if you're purchasing nuts in bulk, which is what we're doing, the moisture has already been reduced in those nuts to where they're safe in a vacuum-packed container. If you go to your local grocery store or a big box store, you can buy plenty of nuts in vacuum sealed cans, and there can be raw nuts, and that's just fine.
So all we're trying to do is reduce that. We have had instances, not very often, maybe once a year, where we always sniff a batch of nuts when you open it.
Yeah, we taste them too.
We taste them.
Your nose is a very good instrument to test things with, and your sense of taste is phenomenal.
Right. I mean, mankind has managed to keep from killing themselves for centuries. About once a year, one or the other of us will open a package of nuts, and you're just like, okay, God, it's gone rancid. You know, now usually what that means is that the seal has broken on the jar. Jars that have not had the seal broken from the same batch are usually perfectly fine.
Yeah, we've kept nuts for a year or two in a couple of cases. The 2 years was accidental. Normally we'll go through our bulk nuts in about a year.
Yeah, well, we try and buy enough ahead that we always have a stock on the shelf. If someone wants to make a batch of cookies or make a pie that uses almonds in the shell or something, we don't want to have to run off to the Family Dollar and spend a fortune. There's times when you just want to have things as a convenience item. And for us, nuts are a convenience item. We snack on them sometimes. We almost always have a box of cashews open. It's sitting around somewhere. There's sometimes macadamia nuts all open. There's always almonds and pecans available.
And walnuts.
And walnuts. I don't usually snack on walnuts. I know you do sometimes.
I do.
He likes the walnuts plain. I like them roasted, actually.
So let's talk just a second about the scientific basis that people get concerned about. Botulinum, that's the bacteria that can create botulism in people or other animals. Mm-hmm. They'll read that botulinum, that creates botulism, thrives or can thrive in depleted oxygen environments. So you think about it and say, oh, you're taking the air out of the jar and that's going to create a low oxygen environment. Well, that's not the whole story. Mm-mm. It turns out
it's a low pressure environment. It's not necessarily a low oxygen environment.
That's not the whole story. There's a problem that people don't realize. The amount of moisture that's in the food stuff is really critical. You may not know that the spores for botulinum can persist and will persist even in canned food that you buy at the grocery store. It's all around you in the environment. It's everywhere. Mm-hmm. It's on fruits, it's on vegetables, it's on meat, it's on everything. Mm-hmm. But it's not normally a problem because you don't get an overgrowth of bacteria. Well, the issue is if that spore is able to start replicating bacteria in a low oxygen environment, which admittedly a vacuum sealed jar is a lower oxygen environment, that might be a problem. But what's the overriding issue here is the moisture content. The people who process nuts for commercial and retail sale and consumption always reduce the moisture to where it's not going to be a problem.
Mm-hmm. Well, just for their own storage, you know, there's lots of things you only get your harvest once a year from these nut trees. It's not like you could delay it an extra 5 months. No, you have to pick the nuts when they are ready, otherwise they're going to rot. And you have to process them, shell them, and all that other kind of stuff. And through scientific study, they have figured out how to pay attention to when the stuff is ready, when it's, you know, the best time to harvest it, when is the best time to storage, what they need to do to it to keep it from rotting. The last thing they want to do is have a whole bunch of stuff go moldy on them.
And you know, mold will occur with less water in food than botulinum will grow. So if you get a package of nuts from the grocery shelf and it has mold or other fungus in it, don't eat it.
Yeah.
That's the safest thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean...
botulism is not something to be overly concerned about. There are treatments for it if you get into it, but there's not many cases each year in the U.S.
Right.
There are plenty of people who do rogue canning, which is not what we're talking about.
Right.
Irene has a special license, or had a special license, up until fairly recently, that allowed her to do the pressure canning of low acid foods so
Right.
that you weren't having enough acidity in the food to stop botulism from growing. It's not an issue.
I mean, you know, look at the recalls we get in the United States. I've probably read you a dozen recalls in the last 2 weeks. 90% of the recalls were an unlisted ingredient, which is not a problem unless you happen to be allergic to that ingredient. 90%. I mean, it was like, this has got milk products in it. Okay, if you're allergic to milk, that could, you know, I mean, and some of it was silly, like there was a batch of eggnog recalled because it had eggs in it. and I just roared when I read that one. It was just like, okay, maybe, I think they were just calling it nog and instead of eggnog, but to me, eggnog has eggs in it unless you specifically state it doesn't. So, but they were recalling it because, you know, and they wanted the alert to go out. So it's usually dairy of some sort. So you've got milk products in there, you've got eggs in there, you've got soy, the things that are considered to be prime.
Peanuts in general.
Yes, peanuts in general. Those are the kind of things that people are most likely to have a heavy-duty, life-challenging allergic reaction to. So that's what most of the recalls are. One of the things that people don't get is if you've ever watched a science movie about how bugs grow, in other words, bacteria, mold, all that kind of stuff. You get the Petri dish, okay, the glass dish, and they've got agar-agar or some other nutrition in there, and they inoculate that, and it grows. It doesn't grow instantly all over. A lot of times you'll get a spot here and a spot there, kind of like when you get a piece of bread and you're like, well, darn, this is my last piece of bread. That piece of blue is not there. I'm throwing it away and I'm eating the rest of the bread. I'm throwing it in the toaster anyway. The chance you're going to die from it, unless you're allergic to bread, is really slim.
You need to go rescue that.
He's taking apart his alligator. In case you're wondering, this is the alligator and this is the fluff.
Well, enough about that particular aspect of food safety. We made a big investment for ourselves for Christmas this year. And if you watched our Christmas show, sitting right here, we had a big box in between us, and it was a Harvest Right freezer. It was a freeze dryer.
Your collar keeps rolling up in the bag. Need to iron your shirts.
We bought a freeze dryer.
Right.
And we haven't run it yet.
Nope.
It came in 2 weeks earlier than what we expected. We actually expected it after Christmas.
Right.
So we'll show you us bringing it in and getting it to go into the pantry, which is where it's going to live. For now, we think that's the right place for it to be. I'll have to do something about the vacuum pump because it can get hot, and I'll probably find a way of putting it up so that Isa, our cat, can't get into it. We chose a freeze dryer because we have limited freezer space.
Right.
We have not limited canning jars. We have a lot of canning jars. An awful lot of the food that I can is for use when we go camping, and we go camping for 5 to 25 days at a shot, and this is associated with Irene's business. So jars with prepared food
It's heavy.
that has water in it, you have glass that can break, you have a lot of water that comes along with it. We can frequently have several hundred pounds of food in jars with us.
Yeah.
So what we've been looking at is finding a freeze dryer that would actually potentially work for us. We don't know if it's going to work. I know that the
I don't see why it wouldn't. Let's put it that way.
we know that the science behind it works. The question is, are the power specifications true? And looking at the equipment, which has specific rating labels on it, I know that we can run this equipment on our off-grid solar system.
Now, obviously, we wouldn't choose to do this during a storm session where you're going to have lousy solar for a week.
But we can definitely run it in late spring and in the summer without a problem.
Right.
So what we're looking to do is we're looking to supplement our normal canning process with some freeze drying.
Right. You know, there's things that I don't really want to have to can. So that means they have to be frozen or freeze dried.
There are things that, if we can, are a problem for me. Because one of the things that you would normally do with some kinds of fruit is you would sugar the fruit when you're canning it so that you don't have to pressure can it because.
Right.
So I'm looking forward to having some freeze-dried fruit.
Right. Well, we've had our first, if you think back, how long ago was our first experience with eating something freeze-dried?
Oh, a long time ago. Was that when we went to the Kennedy Space Center?
I think it was the Kennedy Space Center.
Yeah.
Yeah. Astronaut
ice
ice cream. That's freeze-dried ice cream. It was awesome. It just melts in your mouth. It's really nifty. You know, there's...
Might try that.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. The idea that we could have healthy, unadulterated, we know everything that's in them, fruits and veggies and stuff like that, without adding a lot of grease, without adding a lot of sugar, all that sort of stuff. We now have blackberries and raspberries, which we have hopes will produce well this coming year. Our strawberries did pretty well this year. We need to protect them from the rodents this coming year better. But strawberries, you know, when I buy strawberries at the grocery store, they have been mishandled.
They're really good for a day, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe two if
Two
we're
if you're
really
lucky. If I get them from one of the big box stores like Sam's or Costco, I can usually get 3 days, 4 days out of them. But the regular grocery stores around here don't handle their veggies right. And it's very, very common, whether it's their transporters or what the heck it is that's getting it to them, you know, their stuff is already starting to mold. The number of times I have looked at a container in the grocery store and seen fruit that was already molding, that means it's going to, you have to handle it right then and there. So even if they're giving it to you for free practically, you got to process it that night. So that means you freeze it, you do something with it so that it won't rot. Just being able to avoid losses like that. I was reading the cookbook that we bought for the freeze dryer, and they're like, well, just go ahead and put the stuff that leftovers, for instance. You want to preserve leftovers, but you're not going to run the freeze dryer right now. Go ahead and put them in a flat tray in your freezer. And that way they're ready to go when the next time you run the freeze dryer. So collect your stuff together until you've got enough stuff to run in the freeze dryer. You've already pre-frozen it. That cuts down on the amount of time for the cycle.
And for me, it's not the time, it's the amount of power that's required to run that equipment.
Right. And then toss it in there, you know.
So picking up the freeze dryer was interesting.
Oh, Jesus.
Three days before the unit arrived here in our town, the new truck stop opened up right across the street from the convenience store
where we get our stuff delivered.
Where we suggested that they meet us. They were supposed to call before they showed up.
Right. They emailed us and said that they'd be arriving on this specific day, and then there was some sort of hint about when it was going to arrive. And
I know when it arrives because it was coming out of Flagstaff,
Right.
Arizona. I know how long it takes them to get down here.
Right.
And it was pretty likely that it was the last piece loaded onto the trailer. It came down in a tractor trailer. So
Right.
it was a 40-foot truck on the back of the truck, a 40-foot container on the back of the truck. And sure enough, our unit was all the way on the back. But we hadn't heard, and I finally told Irene, it's going to take me a while to get into town with the
Right.
box truck.
Right, yeah, because you don't want to rattle your kidneys out.
So I said, I'm going to leave right now. I don't know when they're coming in, but my guess is they'll be in sometime in the next half hour to an hour.
Right, and you'd been on the road for about 10 or 15 minutes when the driver called me and said, "Hi, I'm here." And I'm like, "Oh, excellent, my husband's on the way to town." And I said, why don't you meet him over at the new truck stop? Because there's plenty. She goes, oh, that's awesome. I was just going to suggest that. I said, yeah, he's driving a white box truck with a lift gate on it. So it's going to be an easy transfer. And that way there's plenty of room for both of you over there. And because when the big semis come in like that, they have to parallel park along the road next to the convenience store because there's no place in there for them. They used to be able to, before they built the restaurant on the end of that, there used to be enough room over there for them to have all the delivery trucks come in there. But now there isn't, so they have to park on the road, which is kind of a iffy situation sometimes. Sometimes there's no room.
So the FedEx driver was a woman. She was really nice, and she was really happy when I pulled up. I pulled up behind her truck, went to knock on the door, and she said, "Oh, you must be here for a pickup." And I said, "Yes, ma'am, I am." And we exchanged our credentials, and she said, I said, "Well, I have a lift gate on the back." She said, "Oh, thank goodness."
Yeah, because it's heavy.
And so the unit weighed 230 pounds thereabouts.
Yeah, because it's all strapped onto a pallet.
Well, it was supposed to be on a pallet, and it was on a pallet. But when you see me taking the unit off our truck, you'll notice that the cardboard box did not have a bottom in it.
No.
So
it's okay. It worked.
The transfer took less than 5 minutes. She was just happy as a clam because she needed to go down further south and do deliveries there. This is going to make her life a lot easier.
Right. And it's such a big parking lot over there. I haven't actually been over to the store or anything, but I am starting to get curious.
No, you're not getting curious. You can't go.
I can't go. Yeah, I want to know what they have for drinks and stuff, because sometimes the little place, the little convenience store just has a crappy selection of drinks. I see in all the truck stops and stuff, I see this huge upswing in the number of energy drinks and stuff, which we don't drink.
I don't drink energy drinks.
And, what I'm looking for is good seltzer water and stuff like that.
I might be old, but I still have energy.
Yeah, that's true. And, I'm looking for seltzer water, and the seltzer water at the convenience store lately has been kind of meh.
So we got the unit back home, pulled it off the truck on the lift gate, and I used our garden cart with a tire that is coming apart.
Yes.
It's not flat. The tire itself is coming apart, but I wrestled the unit onto the lift gate, dropped the lift gate down to the cart height, and put it on the cart and pulled it into the yard.
Right.
And called Irene and said, "I need help."
Oh, yeah. Well, I was there when you got it off the lift gate because I helped steady it because the ground is wobbly over there. And then we just put it on. We have large furniture dollies that we keep around just because rolling something on wheels is much nicer than, trying to hump it around here some other way. And we just brought it in with the dollies and rolled it in there. And, the hardest part at that point was when we were able to take it apart. In other words, there's multiple boxes, smaller boxes. But the hardest part then was actually picking up the machine, which I think is 150 pounds.
About 130.
130. And lifting it up to counter height. Because that's just a smidge higher than you'd like to lift something that's heavy.
It really wasn't all that heavy. The two of us could easily handle that.
It's awkward. There's not so many places to grab onto.
The one thing I would say is if you get a Harvest Right freeze dryer, you need to make sure you have a couple of people around who have strong muscles.
Right.
Especially if you get the big one.
You're like, and when we don't have the biggest one, we have a medium-sized one, but it's just like there was not a great place to grab, and they warn you about don't grab on the door, you'll damage it. And so you're like trying to figure out how to get your fingers under this and then get it up onto the counter and then get the fingers out as you're pushing it backwards. But it worked.
We made it. We didn't drop anything.
Nope. Didn't squish any fingers.
And we didn't put it exactly where we thought originally to put it in the pantry because there's a little more weight there than I'd like on that end of the countertop.
Well, we had to look to practical access. You know that you need room for the freeze dryer, and then you need room next to it for the pump. And ideally, you'd have a big countertop. Well, we don't happen to have a big countertop right now. But we're really a little short on storage right now, and we're still trying to mush some things around to improve that. But then we had the issue of where are the cabinets that exist. Fortunately, I hadn't finished the cabinets. I was actually planning to mount one more cabinet right where we wound up putting the freeze dryer.
There's no room now. We hadn't planned on this unit showing up 3 weeks early.
Right.
We were expecting the 4 to 6 week delivery that they'd originally said.
Right.
We put the order in, and 2 days later they said your unit's going to arrive on this
And
date.
we're like, uh-oh.
We're in the middle of Christmas. We're in the middle of trying to get cookies made and other things.
Right.
Just a real
Well, we
cluster.
had, I was busy sorting stuff in the pantry and moving stuff around.
It was a mad scramble, to say the least.
Yes.
Because this unit was coming in. We had to have a place to put it. And we found a place to put it.
Yes.
We put it in place. We set it up with the vacuum pump.
Mm-hmm.
The vacuum pump has the oil in it now. It's connected up.
Right.
That all works. It's like everything else these days. When you get a unit, no matter what it is, I have a battery that I have to go update the software on.
Right.
So the freeze dryer came, and the first thing they said is
Update the
your
software. I mean, I just got a new GPS for Rufus the other day, and the first thing you have to do is update the software. And you're like, and I know that's the standard thing these days, but it still annoys the bejesus out of me that I buy a brand new item, and the first thing I have to do is update the software. And sometimes it's not as easy as you would think. You have to connect it to something, and then it's not, yeah.
Well, the problem with the freeze dryer is I need a specific size USB stick to put the software upgrade on, so I can go stick it in the side of the freeze dryer. I don't happen to have one that size. I have bigger ones, and those won't work. So I have to, tomorrow when we go to do something else, I'll pick up the right size USB stick. So, well, listen, thanks very much for watching. We'll be giving you some snippets as time goes on as we use this unit. We're figuring out what we're going to make for our on-the-go meals.
Right.
We'll share those and we'll tell you what we think of them. It's going to allow us to segregate those things that Irene can eat versus those things that I shouldn't eat, so that we can keep on our respective diet plans, food plans, or not diet plans. And hopefully it's going to make life easier.
Well, the big thing is that when we started canning to go to events, we were able to drop our overhead a lot. Initially, what we did was we froze meals, but you're dealing with an environment in which keeping frozen food frozen, iffy. Even with a really good, expensive cooler, you can only keep frozen food for 3 or 4 days. We were losing a couple of meals every time we went to a camping event. So then we started doing canned foods because it doesn't spoil. It's shelf stable. I mean, it will spoil eventually, but it's shelf stable. So it means it would be no different than if I went to the grocery store and I bought cans of canned stew in the grocery store and brought them home and just took them to the event with me. So we dropped our overhead in terms of lost food dramatically by doing the canned thing.
And we saved on buying ice, because when you go to these events, ice can be really, really expensive on a daily basis. It was not unusual for us to be spending $10 to $15 a day to keep our food safe.
Right. And so all of a sudden we were cutting our overhead in terms of lost food, cutting our overhead in terms of ice, because the amount of ice necessary to keep my drinks cool is a big difference from what it takes at 40 degrees for a refrigerator. So food that you're concerned about spoiling, 40 degrees.
Lower.
Or lower, So that's tough. And we learned to pack with ice packs and all kinds of other stuff, but it still has its limitations. And like I say, if you hit a really hot, if all of a sudden the temperature spikes and it's 100 degrees, even covering we would cover the coolers with wool blankets, we would do all the things, but it still was not enough. So we went from losing a lot of food with frozen food to losing almost nothing with canned food, but then you're dealing with the weight.
And when we're driving a long distance, weight's not a good thing. But you know what? Say goodnight, Irene.
Yeah. So you'll definitely have to come back and see what we might figure out. We've already got a couple of recipes in mind for some things that we know we make. Oh, an advantage to freeze drying. Okay, so one of the things we were talking about when we were watching a show specifically from Homesteading Family on freeze drying meals.
Chicken pot pie.
Chicken pot pie. When we make chicken pot pie at home to eat at home, you would thicken the chicken goop.
This is a big, big advantage.
Yeah. You can't pre-thicken your chicken pot pie unless you use the clear gel, which is a different flavor and texture.
It's a different flavor and texture.
It's fine in fruit. I don't care for it as much in soups and stews.
Freeze drying, you can use flour, make a roux, thicken your
just the same way as you would at home. And then when you freeze dry it, it's in there already.
We'll let you know how this turns out because I'm really, really anxious to give this a shot.
We're excited about that because that's one of the things we hadn't even really thought about it initially, that was one of the main advantages, that you could pre-thicken all this stuff and then, you know, at the other end you just add in the proper amount of water, and because the chicken is already cooked, it'll only take a minute or two to rehydrate. It'll be just the same as if you went to one of the expensive sporting goods stores and bought last time I checked, $25 for a package of beef stew for 2 people. One meal, $25. I can go out to a restaurant for that cost. It'll be fast food, but still.
If you don't stop talking, you're not going to get dinner.
That's true. So be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And stay tuned because this should be interesting.
We'll see you on the next one. Keep brainstorming.
Bye.